Hey guys, what is up? My name's Thomas. I'm the author of the project file, and in collaboration with 7 Styles, we are proud to announce our new Shimmer Motion Kit. So let's take a look at some before and afters using this product. You can see from the demo that all we have to do is brush over an area, and we have these really elegant, beautiful particles that come based on the source that you select. So you can see in here that these are basically straight out of the box examples, but we're going to go over them in detail in this tutorial. And it's really broken up into 2 parts. We have the Photoshop side, which we're going to go over first, and then the After Effects side, which we're going to go over after. So let's dig right into Photoshop using 7 Styles Shimmer Photoshop Action. So we are in Photoshop now, and what we're going to be doing is not so much installing this action as we are loading the action. However, there are some things I want to go over with you to make sure that you get the best results possible. So first I'm going to take my image I'm working with and drag it onto the Photoshop icon, and you could additionally go to File, Open, and then find that file on your desktop as well and click Open. And the first thing we want to do is make sure that the image we're working with is RGB at 8 bits per channel. So how we're going to do that is go in the top menu bar to Image, Mode, RGB Color, and make sure that this 8 bits per channel is selected. So that's the first thing. The next thing we want to do is make sure that the image that we're working with has the proper dimensions to get the best results. You don't want to use images that are way too small or way too big. Now 7 Styles has it recommended to use an image no smaller than 1500 pixels and no larger than 3500 pixels. So if we go and check out this image size by going to Image, Image Size, you can see that it's 5,184 pixels wide. Now this may be set to inches, and we don't want that. We want it on pixels for this. The optimum range is 2,500 to 3,500 for the largest dimension. So I'm going to hit right in the middle at 3,000 on this and hit OK. And that's going to scale it down so we're at the optimum size to work with for this. So the next thing we want to do then is load the action. So we're going to go to the Actions icon, and if you're not seeing this, go on the top menu bar to Window, and then Actions, and then we're going to go on this little hamburger menu right here, and we're going to go to Clear All Actions just to keep things clean. But you don't have to do this step. I just want you to clearly see that I'm working with just the shimmer action. So then we're going to go to the menu again and go to Load Actions. And then we're going to find the download from Video Hive, and I have mine right here on my desktop. And then go to Shimmer Photoshop Action, and you want to make sure you're working with the proper version of the action. So CC 2017 Plus, I'm working in CC 2018 right now. So I'm going to load this version and hit Open. All right, and that's everything for installing the Photoshop Action. In the next video, we're going to go over actually using the Photoshop Action. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new layer and name it Brush. So we're going to go down to the Layers panel, and if you're not seeing that, go to Window and then Layers. And then in the very bottom right, there is this icon right here that looks like a piece of paper that's kind of folded over. That's the Create New Layer icon. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to rename this layer Brush, all lowercase. And that's very important. It has to look exactly like what it does right now. All lowercase, no spaces, nothing extra. Otherwise, the action won't work. So the next step we have to do is select the brush tool. You can hit B for brush, or just select this icon right over here. And I'm going to change the color of the foreground by clicking on this black swatch right there, and then dragging to the top right so it's red. And now another thing you want to make sure before you start to brush is you want to make sure that the opacity is set to 100%. And this is probably the number 2 most common support question we answer when an action isn't working. At least make sure before you run the action, it's set to 100%. All right, so we are all ready to start brushing our subject. Now there's 2 ways you can adjust the brush size. You can either hit the left bracket and right bracket, or you can right click and change the size this way. Now I would suggest having the hardness set to 0. You can have it set to something higher, but you want to make sure that the results are kind of organic. And what I mean by that is I'm going to undo those brush strokes I just made, and I'll make this really small. So you're not going to get very good results from having really thin shapes like this. It's not recommended. You want to have I'd say about this size. I mean, this kind of produces the best results with nice soft edges, and we're not looking for hard edges either. You can turn the hardness up and select edges like this and be really precise, but you're going to get inferior results compared to having a softer brush. And most of the time with these elegant effects, you don't want to see hard edges. So I'll go back in. I'm going to finish brushing the subject. Something like that should look nice. All right, so now we're all ready to run the action. So we're gonna go to the actions icon, and then we're gonna go to our shimmer action, and then we're just gonna go down to this icon right here for play and hit play. And that's going to do a whole bunch of stuff that 7Styles has set up for us in Photoshop to create a really elegant result. Now I'm gonna fast forward to the results of this so you can see. And this is the results that we get using the Shimmer Photoshop action. You can see some really bright, beautiful particles are coming from this and some great iris bokeh in the background. It's just a really awesome effect. And there's quite a few layers that are being created that you can play around with in here. 7Styles has a whole bunch of different color options you can play with. And I'm not going to dig too much deeper into this in this tutorial because 7Styles has such a great tutorial just for this action. So if you want to dig way deeper into this and all the different layers that are created and how to edit them, feel free. In the description, I'm going to link to that video. And I'll show you guys one more example I did for this tutorial. We can see if I twirl this down and turn the brush on. This was the brushed area I did for the image. I'll turn that off. And this is the before image, and this is the after. So again, really awesome results and really quick too. It takes about, let's say, a minute to two, depending on your image size, for the results to finalize in Photoshop. The last thing I want to mention before we dig into the After Effects side of things is if you have any errors that are coming up in Photoshop, we have an FAQ page that covers the most common errors and their troubleshooting solutions in the description below. So that's everything, you guys. I hope you enjoy the Photoshop action. In the next tutorial, we're going to cover going over installing the Motion Kit. All right, you guys, we are on tutorial number 3, installing the Motion Kit. So what I want you to do is go to your download from VideoHive, and I have mine saved to my desktop. So in this top Finder window, we can see that we have Shimmer Motion Kit version, whatever the latest version is that you're working with. And then we have a couple files. We have the motionkitclub.pdf, and what this is it has an access code for you. So if you go on the web to motionkit.club, there's a membership site that's got free resources just for people who have purchased our products, and it's kind of our way of saying thank you to them and their support. Next, we have the readme.txt file, and this is just a text version of the instructions and direct links to this YouTube video of different sections and parts. And then we have the Shimmer AE install, and this has the assets folder and the main JSX bin file, which creates the effect. And then finally, we have the Shimmer Photoshop Action, and we already went over this in the previous tutorials, but this is all for the Photoshop side of things. Within this Shimmer AE install, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be dragging these two files into our Script UI Panels folder. So on a Mac, we're going to go to Applications, and then the latest version of After Effects, and then Scripts, and then Script UI Panels. And we're just going to take these two files. Now for my Windows users, I have in the readme.txt file the instructions file. Where you want to go is Program Files, Adobe, Adobe After Effects, Scripts, Script UI Panels. Okay, so we're just going to take and drag these two and drop them into there. Now, one thing that we've noticed people have gotten wrong in the past is they've taken this file and dragged it into there, and that's incorrect. You want to make sure that this Motion Kit Assets folder is dropped right into that folder as is, so don't delete the brackets or anything. Now, if you've already purchased a Motion Kit from us and you already have a Motion Kit Assets folder in, then all you'd want to do is go into the download to the Motion Kit Assets and drop the Shimmer into that Motion Kit Assets folder that's already present. So I won't do that since I already have the Shimmer folder in there, but that's basically it for installing it in After Effects. But there is one last thing we have to do. And if I open After Effects really quick, and I go to After Effects on my menu bar, Preferences General, so just the main preferences for After Effects, we want to make sure on these checkboxes that Allow Scripts to Write Files and Access Network is selected. So if it's not selected, make sure it's selected, and then click OK. And it's really that simple. Just restart After Effects and everything should take effect. That we'll be all ready to go for the next tutorial where we're going to go over the Motion Kit overview. All right, you guys, in this video, we're going to be going over the Motion Kit overview. So let's begin by making sure our After Effects workspaces is looking the same. Let's go on the top to Standard and click on that tab. And if it's still not looking the same, go on the menu button to reset to saved layout, and it should look quite similar. But one thing I want to change is I don't like how the Effect Controls panel typically docks with the Project panel. So what we're going to do is click on this, and we're going to click, hold, and drag and drop this to the left of the Composition panel right there. And that should dock it so we can easily see the Effect Controls panel and the Project panel. And if you're not seeing the Effect Controls panel at all, just go to Window and Effect Controls right there. and that turned it off, so we'll turn it back on. So let's dig into the Shimmer Motion Kit. We're going to go to Window and then go down to shimmermotionkit.jsx bin. Now the first thing you're going to want to do with this is change the name. And you want to make sure that this is something custom. When you're working in After Effects with the script more than once, you want to make sure every time you run this that it's a unique name. Okay, so I'm just going to name this example for now. So you can work with whatever dimensions you want. If you want to work with HD, 4K, vertical video, whatever, it's up to you. Now, it's only supported up to 4K, but you can technically go larger. So we'll go down to the next one, the use source dimensions. Now, what this allows you to do is, let's say you have a source with a kind of a random dimension. Rather than having to look it up and insert them, this will just automatically use the source that you select. And then finally, we have the frame rate if you want something other than 30. So I'm going to leave this at 1920 by 1080, the HD settings for now, and we'll just click OK. And then it's going to come up with a prompt asking where our source is, and I have this on my desktop. This is the image that I used in the main marketing for the product. We'll click Open, and then it's going to do its thing. It's really fast. It only really takes 10-15 seconds, like it is done just now. So we're going to dock this on the effect controls. I'm going to click, drag, and bring this onto there. I'll bring this over just a little bit. There, and it's really that simple. So let's dig into the project panel and see what it created within here. The first thing you'll note is that this name example, that's what we used in the prompt right here where we said example. If we would have named this red scarf, for example, it would have named this folder red scarf. And then within there, we have 3 more folders. We have the edit, render, and other folders. So I'll twirl down the edit and we have step 1, step 2, step 3, and example. And again, this is named example because that's what we inserted in the prompt. But you want to think of this composition as step 4. Even though I didn't technically label it as step 4, that's why I want you to think of it as step 4. And then when you're done, when you have everything edited and looking how you want it to, you would go to the render compositions and you would select which render you would like to use. And we're going to go over that in the last tutorial. So we'll just skip over that for now and then go to the last folder, which is the other folder. Twirl that down and we have the assets, which is the main source that we inserted. And then we have some miscellaneous comps to build the effect. And finally, we have the optional comp, which this has the time remap source. And again, we'll go over this in the last tutorial, but just know that if you're using the time remap setting, you can insert video and then that will time remap the video. It's kind of like what I did in the demo in the last scene. So that is everything for the overview of the Motion Kit. We're going to dig into working with the steps and isolating your subject and focal areas in the next tutorial. All right, you guys, we are in tutorial number 5, isolating your subject and focal areas. So let's begin in step 1 by just positioning our source how we want it within here. So I'm going to select the layer and hit S for scale, and we're going to scale this down. I'm actually going to go and I'm just going to bring my mouse wheel back, and that will zoom out a little bit. Now we can more clearly see the full dimensions. And I'm going to hit P, and we can move the position over and up, or we can just click and drag it within this panel. And I'm going to scale it down, hitting S and down on there. I'll kind of try and line it up how I had it in the preview video. Something like that. That's pretty close. So now step 1 is done. Let's go to step 2. So the first thing when we go into step 2 is we want to make sure that our current time indicator is on frame 0. So if it's anywhere else other than frame 0, the first thing you want to do is grab it and bring it to frame 0 where it says brush here. Now let's work with the brush tool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the top to this brush icon right up here and click on that. Now that's going to bring up 2 panels. It's going to bring up the brush panel and the paint panel, and it should come up by default, but if it doesn't, go up to the top to window and then brushes and then window and paint, and that'll bring those 2 up. Okay. Now what we want to do is let's just make sure our brush and paint settings are the same. So I'm going to bring this over just a little bit and we'll start in the paint panel. So you want to make sure that your settings are the exact same as mine. Opacity at 100 and 100, mode set on normal, and this is the most important one. Channels is set to alpha. You don't want it on RGBA or RGB. You want it on alpha. Okay, and then finally, you want this on constant. And this should be black in the foreground and white in the background, but if not, you can kind of play around with this to make sure that is correct and black is in the foreground. And then for the brush settings, we want the diameter. We can customize this later. Angle at 0, roundness at 100, hardness at 0, spacing should be at default at 25%, but you can turn that off if you want as well to have tighter spacing. I'll just leave it on for now though. And then the brush dynamics and all these other settings set to off. So now we have our brush and paint settings all set the same. We're gonna go to our layer with the brush tool selected and double click. And that will allow us to brush directly on that composition, which is what we want. So I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit by moving my mouse wheel in. And then what I'm going to do is before I start brushing, I'm going to change the mode just a little bit so it looks more like it's in Photoshop. In the middle, we have these three dudes, and the one has a red icon. It's the toggle alpha overlay. We're going to click on that and we're going to set the opacity to 100%. So if you have everything set up how it is right now, it'll look very similar to Photoshop. And the last thing before we start brushing is I just want to show you how to change the brush diameter. You can manually do it by adjusting the diameter right here, up or down, and that will change the brush size. But the faster way is the hotkey. On a Mac, if you hold Command, or on a PC, Control, you click and on the left mouse button, drag up or down. That will allow you to change the brush size, which is really slick and honestly pretty fast to edit with. So now all we have to do is just brush over. So we're going to keep brushing over our subject that we want to have the effect apply to. Just going to kind of brush the outside. You can brush it however you want, but there are some best practices that I would recommend. So let's just say, for example, I'll undo all that. I wouldn't recommend having really thin lines like this. Like that just won't look very good. So we'll undo that. And I don't recommend having your subject take up most of the screen. That won't look good either. We just kind of want a nice middle ground where the subject is clearly in focus, but not taking up the whole screen or a tiny little part of it. So then the next step, now that we have this done, is we need to go out of this kind of brush mode that we're in where we're adjusting the layer. Hit the X on this tab and that'll close this layer with a brush that we're working with is. So I'll do that. And then now when we are back in our step 2 isolate, we'll notice that it's not all gray anymore. It's actually colored, which is what we want. And we set this up this way so that you can clearly see where it is that you brushed. Okay, so that's looking really nice. That's exactly what we want. Next, we're going to go to step 3, focal areas. And notice right away, again, the current time indicator is not on frame 0, it's on frame 37. So we want to click and drag that back to frame 0 where it says brush here. When you're working with the Shimmer Motion Kit, you want to make sure that you brush focal areas that you want the viewer's eyes to go to. So what I mean by that is, let's say in this example, I would say a focal area would be her face. And another focal area might be like right here on her scarf because there's some nice contrast and detail on this the thread that's coming off. And that's what you kind of want to look for with this. So if the face was close up, you might want to have the focal area be the eye. And how we're going to be doing this is the exact same as before. We're just brushing where the focal areas are. So with the current time indicator on frame 0, I'm going to double click that layer again. So now we're editing the layer directly, and I'm just going to brush over the face and maybe like right here. So we get that nice sharpness on the detail of the threads. So now that we have our areas covered, we're just going to hit X to close out that. So now we can see that we have this green overlay, and that's just to kind of help differentiate step 3 from step 2. So you can see clearly where you set your focal areas to if you want to go back and edit them later. Or in step 2, you can clearly see where you brushed on that. So in the next video, we're going to see our results and we're going to customize our results. All right, you guys, we are on tutorial number 6, customizing your results. So let's begin. We've already went through step 1, step 2, and step 3, and now we're ready to see our final results. So let's go into the example composition. And the first thing you'll note is that the current time indicator is on frame 0, so it's just showing us the filter on our main image. So from frame 0 to frame 120, it builds. And now at frame 120, where it says edit here, we have our final result, and it's looking really nice. Now within here, we have 4 main controllers. And it might seem like there's a lot, but we really narrowed this down to just the essentials that you need to get the best results possible. So the first one we have is this shimmer controller. Now by default, your effect controls panel probably looks like this. So what we want to do first is select any of the effects and hit Command A on a Mac or Control A on a PC and twirl them up. The ones that aren't quite self-explanatory are the emitter source. So this one, it's right here, this little crosshair. I want you to take, and if you're not seeing that, it might be because it's really small, but you might not be seeing it because you have View, Show Layer Controls not checked. So we want to make sure that's checked. And then we'll go back to the emitter source, select that, and you want to kind of drag that to wherever the middle of where you brushed is. And you don't have to do this step, but I recommend it. I think it gets a little bit better results because what it's doing is it's more evenly dispersing the particles based on where you brushed your subject in step 2. The next are all pretty self-explanatory for the main particle amount, speed, size, opacity. You can adjust all this stuff. The particle saturation, if you want it to be more saturated or less. The tint, you can change the particles to a specific color. The inner and outer range, there are particles that are close to the subject and particles that are farther away. So you can kind of play with those and move them out or in if you'd like. And you can adjust the random seed if you want to see what the particles, just keep playing with the numbers on this and it'll move the particles around and give you different results. The amount that the particles flicker, it's at 50% by default. So if you want it to flicker more, you can have it higher or lower. And how often they flicker. 7, I think, is a pretty good middle ground. I wouldn't suggest editing these unless you want to, you can. Now, I do want to go over these bottom effects individually with you because they're not quite self-explanatory. If we look at the subject close up, we have these mini particles that are around it. And by default, they go outward. But you can change them to rotate around the subject. So let me show you what that looks like in real time. I'll bring back up the demo and we'll hit play. So see how these particles are kind of going outward? Now watch on the hummingbird, they're rotating around it. So on the line, they're rotating around. And I believe on the dancer, they're rotating around too. So you can choose if you want to have them go outward or rotate around. I love the rotate around look. I think it looks really nice and I'm really happy with that one. The next we have the focal area particles. If we zoom in on the face, you can see that if I uncheck that, there's particles here that are going to disappear. And they're disappearing because we said in the focal areas, that's a focal area. So it's basically disabling them. And I can easily see people not wanting the mini particles on the focal area. And then finally, the filter animates in and out. So the loop is actually happening from frame 120 to 240. And that's a 4-second loop that's happening in the middle. But from frame 0 to 120, the effect is building on. And I can see how people might not want the effect to build on from the filter being on. Okay, so let's go to the scene controller. These are pretty self-explanatory. The brush softness and opacity that you selected in the isolation phase, that you can kind of blur it so it's not as hard of edges if you'd like. Now these next two, the foreground blur and background blur, the foreground is set by the step 2 where you're isolating your subject. So you can see if we set this amount from 10 to 0 that all the blur now is gone on the subject. So we'll put that back to 10 so you can see the difference again. And it's worth noting on this that in the focal area where you selected, there is no blur whatsoever there, no matter what this value is. Next, we have the background blur, and that's the background blur. That's nothing difficult to explain. The auto tint, I do want to go over this one. In this example, if I turn auto tint off, you can see that this is what the results look like without auto tint. So it's way blown out. But with auto tint on, it basically can tell that the results are blown out and it adjusts the tint accordingly. But you can easily go in the background tint and lower this value into negative digits or higher, so you can really customize those results. And the same thing goes for the auto boost on the subject. If I turn that off, you can see that it just kind of darkens it a little bit. And of course, you can go into the brushed area boost and put that to like 50, for example, and it'll really brighten up the subject that we selected. So turn that back down. The contrast and saturation are pretty straightforward. The color options, though, this is really cool. So now all you have to do to play around with 7 Styles color options is just twirl these down and uncheck them. So let's do color option 9, for example. That's one I used in the demo. So we can see this looks really cool. Maybe we think this look is a little too strong. So you can go to color 9 opacity and you can lower that manually to like 50%. But it's just really convenient to go in and kind of play around really quickly with the different looks from the results. So I'll bring that back to color 1. All right, so next we have the extras. Now this effect is being built by multiple particle effects to combine to make this final result. And we wanted to make sure you can still customize everything. So you can go in here and customize any of the different elements within the scene that's being built. You shouldn't really have to play around with this one too much, but just in case, I wanted to include it. And then finally, we have the camera controller. These are kind of more advanced settings here, and this one you should not even edit the loop part. But the motion frequency, you can edit this one. So let's say, for example, we wanted to create a loop, and by default, it has just a little bit of subtle sway and camera motion to it. But let's say we wanted that completely off. So you'd set this value from 0.5 to 0. And now there'll be no motion whatsoever from the camera. I would not recommend having this value any higher than 1. Alright you guys, so that's everything for customizing your results. In the next video, we're going to go over rendering options and what you can do with your renders. Alright you guys, we're in the last tutorial, rendering options. I just want to go over each rendering option that we have set up for you and some best practices and how I'd recommend using them in your projects. So let's dig into After Effects in the example project that we have set up, and we'll go into the render. And you can see that we have 5 main compositions that we're going to be working with: the hit, in, loop, out, loop, reveal, and timer map. Now I went and rendered out each one of these individually so you can see what they look like. So what we're going to be doing is looking in Premiere at these in real time, and then kind of digging back in After Effects so you can see any customization things you might want to take note of. Okay, so let's start with a hit. We'll go into Premiere, and I'll take the hit render and we'll bring it into the timeline and play it back. So we can see first off, I'm going to pause it, that we have this really nice background, and this background is customizable, and I'll show you that in just a second, but we'll continue playing it, and you can see that it has this nice hit that comes at the camera, and this is the exact camera move that I used in the demo for the different ones at the beginning and some towards the end of the video as well. So it's a really aggressive move. And what I recommend this for is like trailers, more aggressive trailers. So what you do is you would lay your audio track in Premiere, and then you would just render out a bunch of different of these hits using the Shimmer Motion Kit. And you can just kind of play with the duration of them and get them to sync up to the music that you're working with. So let's dig back into After Effects, and we'll go into this hit composition. So you can kind of see the layout. It looks pretty standard, but except for one cool thing, we have this background controller. If we dig into the demo on this hummingbird, you can see that I customized this hummingbird scene so it matched the colors of the hummingbird. And you can easily do that in your projects as well. So you can adjust the bokeh color just by selecting the color picker and selecting one of the color values in there. We'll select maybe a red from the scarf and a turquoise from the scarf, and then we'll lighten up that color A quite a bit. Maybe something like that, and then lighten up the B. And that's exactly how I did it in the demo. Okay, so I'll undo that. To render, how you do that is you can select it and then hit the hotkey Control Command M. But just the regular way would be to hit Composition and then Add to Render Queue. When it comes to rendering, what I recommend is to export out as uncompressed as possible and then bring those renders into Premiere and do your final video editing, finally exporting out from Premiere with your final export, like to YouTube or whatever. So what I recommend for export settings is, if you have access to it, I personally use ProRes 422. So the format is QuickTime, and then if you go to Format Options, I'll bring up this panel. If you have it under the video codec, I use ProRes 422. Now, if you don't have it, I would recommend using animation. And if you're worried about file size, because this will produce a larger file size, then I would use H.264. But just be aware that you're going to take a render hit. It's going to take quite a bit longer to render out an H.264 QuickTime file than it would a more uncompressed file like one with animation. And just as a quick reference for you guys, these take about, on my computer in HD, about 5 to 12 minutes each to render out. So if you render out in 4K, you can factor double that time. Let's dig into the in, loop, out. Now, how would you use this? If we go into Premiere, you can see that this has an in, where the loop kind of slowly builds. And then at frame 120, or 4 seconds in, so right here, and I'm going to hold Command and click on this to select, so it's showing frames. At frame 120, this is where the loop starts. So I'm just going to hit C to slice and slice it right there, and then I'm going to play it forward so we can see this is the loop right now that's happening. To frame 239, and we slice it right there. Now what you can do to extend their duration, and a lot of people get this wrong, they think that they have to extend the duration in After Effects, but you don't have to do that. You just have to render the in, loop, out, and then you could have the effect build on, and then all you have to do is just delete this third part, and then take this part and hit Command C, go to the end and paste it. And you can keep pasting it back to back to back and extend the duration for as long as you'd like. So that's how I'd recommend using the in loop out. And the loop that we have set up, this is literally just the middle part that we just saw of the in loop out. And what this is great for is GIFs, animated GIFs. I'm just gonna very quickly go over with you my recommendations for animated GIFs with this project. My first recommendation is to think about how big is your final image going to be for your GIF. And when you're working with GIFs, you want to be very conscious of file sizes because you want them to be as small as possible. Now this GIF will render out 4 seconds. Now I typically on VideoHive, for when I make GIFs, I render them out so that the final GIF is 588 pixels wide by 331 high. And that 588 is the width of the description, if you're curious. And a lot of people ask me about GIFs, so I just wanted to be as clear as I can in this part of the tutorial. So what I would recommend is rather than exporting out the HD size, I would set it up in HD, but then I would set up this loop to render out from After Effects at 588 by 331. So let me show you that example really quick. I'll just go and hit Command-Shift-M, and I have a GIF preset that I have right here, and I can show you this GIF preset. It's QuickTime ProRes 422 588 by 331, and hit OK, and then you'd render that out, and then you would bring that render into Photoshop, which I've already done, and then the last step you would do is go to File, Export, and I still use Save for Web Legacy because I like to really play with the options in the GIF. I mean, there isn't a one-size-fits-all with this. There are a couple recommendations I will have though. Try to keep the colors to as few as possible within these specific numbers that they have. Like I wouldn't recommend going to 16 and then going down to 15. Stay at 16. Keep the dithering as low as possible. That'll help the file size. And finally, of course, you want to change this from looping options once to forever. And this is not looking great, but it's also getting smaller too. So you just have to keep playing with these settings. So let's go into After Effects again and the reveal. Now the reveal is really kind of best for slideshows. So we'll go into Premiere really quick and I'll show you the reveal. And that's kind of like a much more subtle version of the hit. It's a lot slower, it's a lot more elegant, and really this is made for slideshows. That's why I set it up, is so you could take this and let's say you wanted to make a slideshow for somebody for their wedding or whatever. So you just take the Shimmer Motion Kit and you'd create a bunch of examples and render out all the reveals. And then you'd bring them into Premiere, lay your audio track into there, and then I added a second one into here. And this one I didn't render out the full duration because this is actually from the demo that I used. But you can see like you would just lay these back to back and create a slideshow that way. And within After Effects, there's really nothing extra to see in here. But there is one thing I do want to note on the hit and the reveal, and that is that I added this marker. And this marker says set Z position to 0 for loop. And it's got an arrow. So if I go to this hit and I hit P, you can see that there's keyframes on the Z position. If I bring my current time indicator to this last keyframe, it's set to -200. Let's say, for example, I want the reveal to continue on longer than what it is. Well, the best way I would do that is by connecting it to a loop. So we'll bring that into there. But this won't actually sync up because see how there's a difference here in where the camera Z position is. And that's by default. Originally, I was going to have it loop up and not think anything of it, but I really didn't like when it hit right here, it pulling back to 0. So unless you have to sync it up with the loop, but that's how you would make it so you can extend it so it would reveal and then keep showing longer, is you would have this keyframe instead of -200 set to 0. And then finally, we have the time remap. So if we go into Premiere, the time remap is really awesome for intros, and you could use it for a logo sting as well. So I'll delete these, and then we'll drag this into there. And we can see this is what I used. I actually did use this instead of the hit on some of the examples in the demo. but I'll play it back one more time. So it kind of just hits on, it goes really aggressive and then slows and then comes back and kind of wiggles towards the end. One thing that's really cool that you can do with this is you can do a timer map with video. So let me show you what that looks like. I'll delete this one and play this. And then it comes back and the video continues on. So let me show you how I set this up in After Effects, and it's really easy. So what you're gonna do is run the Shimmer Motion Kit and insert your footage, except for in step 1, you're going to copy and then delete the footage. And instead you're gonna go to Other, and then go to Optional, and then Timer Map Source. And then in this composition, you're gonna paste that footage. So it says insert your footage into this. And this is just a guide layer, so don't really pay attention to this. It's not going to render or anything. But it says timer map freeze frame. So you want to get the frame. So this is footage in here. You want to get the frame exactly where you want it to freeze frame at 30 frames. So right here. And I just added the marker to try and kind of help you with it. So then what you do is just go into the rest of the project like you normally would. Go into the isolate, and that's going to have that freeze frame set up for you. So you're going to isolate that. You're going to add a focal area so you can see where I added the focal areas. You're going to go into the dancer example, bring your current time indicator over to where it says to edit, if you want to edit any of the particles or anything in here. And then finally, when you go to render, just go to the timer map and everything will be set up for you. All right, you guys, that is everything. Again, I want to say thank you very much for purchasing the product, and I really hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions along the way, or if there's anything I can help you with at any time, just email me at support@thomascorver.com. Thanks again, you guys. Have a great day.